how about we have a little discussion about water temples? Now, in the Zelda series, they tend to get a bad reputation, but I have a confession to make. I actually really enjoy me a good water temple, and I'm actually even less of a fan of fire and lava temples, to be honest with you. Even though I do enjoy those as well from time to time. But today we're going to be diving into the different water temples that I think are noteworthy, at least from throughout the series, and we'll be getting into why I think they're good or why I think they're bad. Thank you for stopping in, and let's get into it. I think it would be wise to use A Link to the Past Swamp Palace as our first entry on this list. Now, the first time I played through this dungeon, I specifically remember thinking, wow, I'm actually enjoying this one. Now, this is a dungeon that very much embodies its title. You can almost smell the stagnant air and feel the murky water beneath your nasty little hobbit feet. It's a pretty long, winding dungeon with a lot of different rooms set up almost like a labyrinth, and the main goal was to release different levers throughout the rooms in order to increase the water flow throughout the dungeon. And you also have to fight off various hordes of Stalfos, Winders, and Barai. You must also release different raised barriers by hitting switches in order to get to some of those levers. Blade traps and Guru Guru bars also make an appearance here, amongst many others. So yeah, there is absolutely no shortage of monster mayhem going on. But thankfully, Link does the monster mash and eventually finds the hookshot and the big key to proceed through the dungeon. This is the first appearance of the hookshot in the entire Zelda franchise, and it's surprisingly fun and well used. You even use it to defeat the final boss, Argus. This boss is the first of multiple eyeball bosses throughout the game, which do kind of get stale, but this was the first one, so it's actually new and fun on a playthrough. It's not a very challenging boss. All you really need to do is pull off some of the assorted puffballs protecting the main eye, and then start slashing away. It'll start jumping and spinning at you like a real oddball. But make a few good slashes of the sword and you're all good. And that pretty much sums it up. But here's a rundown of what I liked about this place. In summary, the atmosphere fits the theme very well, and you really do feel like you're wading through some dingy old swamp juice. There are a variety of enemies that keep things fresh, and the traps also keep you on your toes. The item is great, and the boss is fine. This was honestly a fun and memorable dungeon that I'd rank pretty highly as being one of my favorite water dungeons of the series, most likely in my top 3 or 4. But with that being said, here are the issues I had with the Swamp Palace. Sometimes I feel like it goes a bit too easy on us. I wish there was a little bit more of a challenge to this place, and definitely the boss. Some of the rooms are pretty ugly, but seeing as this is a swamp palace, that's really not a huge deal. But it's also just not very appealing to look at in various rooms either. And lastly, what the heck is that fat green guy doing over there, man? He keeps telling me to get out of his palace. Second on the list is Lakebed Temple from Twilight Princess. Oh yes, this is one of, if not my favorite, water dungeon. The theme is ominous and dark. It captures the gloomy ambiance so well. And the dungeon design of this temple is phenomenal and beautiful. There's just one large main room with a classic spinning staircase and many different passages shooting off in all different directions, making for a pretty confusing first time playthrough. But once you finish it the first time though, it does get easier on further playthroughs. But my goodness, this dungeon is just so cool. Besides the spinning staircase, you have giant water wheels turning that you must navigate your way through, water canals acting as arteries that circulate water back to the heart of the dungeon in order to fill the center well to its maximum capacity, and you have to fill up that center well in order to even reach the boss door. Each room is a maze in and of itself, making navigating the entire dungeon a pretty long task, but it's well worth the effort in the end. You seriously feel such a sense of accomplishment upon finishing off the last room after you grab that final boss key. You've had to equip and unequip your iron boots a number of times. You've had to crack apart stalactites in order to reach higher places. And once you get the claw shot, which is stinking clawsome by the way, you then had to essentially carousel your way across rotating hanging platforms over bottomless pits of death. And you've also had to swim through coral and jellyfish filled underground tubes, as well as fight iron armor clad monsters. This dungeon is the absolute water bomb, man. I can't tell you how much I really loved it. Anyway, you get to the boss and it's a big wet fart. There's nothing to it. The first stage of it is way too simple. You hookshot the eyeball from the tentacle and slash at it. The end. Stage 2. You climb the giant armored eel and slash at its eyeball again. End of story. Very anticlimactic boss, but at least it looked really cool. So, in summary, this is what I liked. The awesome and eerie soundtrack was amazing. The tricky and tedious dungeon design was challenging and fun, in my opinion. I loved that each room basically had its own maze of sorts to go through. The claw shot is an awesome item that gets put to use really well on all of the ironclad enemies and also to reach difficult places. Alright, now here's what I was not a fan of about this Lakebed temple. I did not like how easy and simple the boss fight was, and nobody really does. Sure, it looks great, but it should have spit electricity at you or something, or sent swarms of murderous piranhas after you. Just something. Other than that, this dungeon is incredible in my humble opinion, and as a side note, even just getting to this dungeon was a good feeling. This is just a really great part of the series right here. I apologize to those who just had a panic attack caused by their childhood PTSD right there. Now look, this is what really gets me. When people talk about this one, they sound like they're one missing key away from snapping and ending it all. I can't really say that I've been there, but I have found the water temple to be very straining in the past. However, I've played Ocarina of Time from start to finish probably 100 times, and that's no joke. I used to even speedrun it, so in that regard, I've played it partially thousands of times. But my point is this, the dungeon doesn't really annoy me. I actually now find it to be one of the more enjoyable dungeons in the whole game, with the Shadow Temple being the least enjoyable in my opinion. So basically this sums it up. Right there. Anywho, why do I like it? As I said in my Lakebed Temple section, I like a good challenge, whether it be a fight, a puzzle, or both. And in this case, the entire dungeon is the puzzle. Now, normally dungeons are made up of an assortment of rooms that contain puzzles within them. But no, the water temple itself is all one huge puzzle. Trying to find the right room to go to and when is the challenge. There's of course the giant central pillar with a handful of different leveled platforms, and you basically need to know which level to set the water to in order to get to the correct one. If you mess up, you have to go through a bunch of rooms and various steps all over again just to correct it. So I can definitely see how people would be annoyed by that. Then there's the iron boots problem. Equipping and unequipping them requires you to open the menu, scroll to the boots, and select or deselect them every time you need to, which is probably a good 30 or 40 times. And if you keep messing up, you could be pausing the game hundreds of times in a playthrough. Another thing people have issues with, and I've also had issues with this, is getting all of the required small keys before you can get to the boss key. Also, I'm not sure if other people get fed up with this, but sometimes getting the right angle to use the hookshot can be pretty temperamental, and that annoys me sometimes as well. And speaking of the hookshot, this is easily one of my favorite renditions of it, and it's used a crap load throughout the dungeon. It's very well utilized. Another thing to note is that the enemies in this dungeon can be tricky to kill. You need to hit the shell blade when it's vulnerable, which is hard to time. So in essence, this entire dungeon is simply hard to time. Timing the water level to be where you need it to be, timing up getting all the keys, timing your hook shots just right, timing your jumps from water spout to water spout, and fighting enemies requires good timing all around. I'm talking to you, Dark Link, you slippery son of a bun. But I love that challenge, and I think this dungeon is very unique in that aspect. I really do enjoy playing through it, and I think it's a beautiful dungeon aesthetically, especially with that music. And in terms of design, it's pretty sick. Whichever meaning to sick you want to assign it, that is. I can totally see why people would hate it, but I feel like that's really based on childhood experiences for a lot of people, and I think that if they just went back, gave it another go, it would be a different story. Like, they still might miss a key, like I still do sometimes, or their repressed memories will come back to them and they'll nail it first try. More things I like about this dungeon are as follows. I like the mix of different obstacles this dungeon throws at you, from water vortexes, to moving platforms, to eye switches, to water spouts, to rolling boulders, to moving spike traps that block your path to the boss door. It's just all really unique stuff. And finally, speaking of that boss though, why give us such a challenging dungeon if all we're going to get at the end is a wimpy little water tentacle? Like, that's the best they could do with an abundantly obvious weak spot? Whatever, man. Anyway, to sum things up, here's what I like. The music and aesthetics are serene and very zen, which I always love. The challenging dungeon design gives me a thrill. Now maybe I'm weird, but it does, and I like it. The item is great once again, and gets used a ton. Not a megaton, but a ton. And I love the mix of different enemies and obstacles. What I don't like is as follows. The wimpy boss with one of the lamest, most uninspired designs I've ever seen. And I also do not like the equipping and unequipping of the boots, but really just nobody likes that. It takes so much extra time. And that's pretty much it, to be honest. And also I have a pro tip for you. Use Ferori's Wind to save you from having to backtrack if you mess up. If you're changing the water level and you think it might be the wrong one, set Ferori's Wind right at that level, just to be careful. Here's another one that people seem to absolutely hate, and I've even seen some people say that they hate it more than the water temple. Now my story with it is this. I used a guide like once or twice, and the rest I was actually able to figure out on my own. So the main goal is to find all the different turnstiles and turn them so as to direct the water correctly through the different colored pipes. This all looks and sounds kind of complicated, but I found that I got the hang of it pretty quickly. There's definitely a lot of precise swimming, walking, and jumping you have to do, so I can imagine how you'd probably be mad if you fell down a few times and had to keep working your way back up somewhere. There are various small platforms and walkways that add to that stress as well, not to mention the almost overabundance of enemies and traps behind every stinking corner. But what I think makes this dungeon more difficult are the mini-bosses. You got two of them, Wart and Gecko. My goodness, I found them to be even harder than the actual boss was, and they took way longer too. I did like the challenge, of course, but one of them really would have been enough time-wise. With two of them, it was just kind of some wasted time. The item, the ice arrows, are absolutely lame, absolutely useless. You basically only use them in this one dungeon, maybe once or twice more later, if that. But there is one good thing that you do get in this temple, and that is the music. I actually really like the theme on this one, a bit more electronic. Anyway, a couple other things I wasn't too keen on was the darkness of this temple. It's really dark and dingy in some rooms with what looks like diarrhea just oozing out of the walls. It's just a bit off-putting at times. It's like they were waiting for the plumber to come clean up Jim's explosion in the third stall on the right, like clean up on aisle 7. Now I did like the colors of the pipes, so I wish we could have gotten more of those bright reds, greens, and yellows. Akin to something like Lanayru mining facility from Skyward Sword would have been nice, but nah, it just stays dark and depressing for the most part. Also the boss, Gyorg. The boss was a real ugly and lame fish. Nothing all that exciting or difficult, just a few jabs here, a few jabs there, shot to the face, and he's done for. All ready to be battered, fried, and served alongside some chips. So overall, I honestly liked the concept of this dungeon, and thought it was pretty good for the most part, but there just wasn't a whole lot going on besides, oh, I gotta turn this turnstile and then swim out of the room, go down the other passage, turn that one, fight this guy, go turn that one, fight this guy, go turn the other one. Just not too much happening. So in summary, what I liked was this. The concept was cool, and the music was good. That's pretty much it. What I disliked was useless item, the ice arrows were garbage, one too many mini bosses. It would have been perfectly fine with just one. As a matter of fact, just a few too many enemies as well. And just lame boss fight, man. I mean, really lackluster. And that's that for this one. And Tower of the Gods from Wind Waker. Here's an example of a dungeon that I see way overrated far too often. I'm pretty sure I could do this dungeon half asleep using my feet instead of my hands. That's obviously hyperbole, but I really wasn't blown away by this one. There was some cool stuff about this dungeon, such as the music, but besides that, I found it to be far too short and far too easy. I'm not kidding when I say it felt like I beat it in 30 minutes on my first try. I barely had to use my brain functions for the most part. I really think the Tower of the Gods looks cooler than it feels to actually play through it, unfortunately. And I know, this is sacrilege right here. I will say this, the designs inside are kind of cool. I like the use of gold, and I liked some of the stairways of light, as well as the design of the statues and stuff. Then there's the mini-boss fight with the Dark Nut that I thought was pretty cool, and more exciting than the final boss even. Now this dungeon gives you the bow as its weapon, and of course the bow is always a great Zelda item, it always has been. It's used a fair amount, which is nice. However, for the most part, this dungeon was really just a fetch quest. You needed to collect the statues, and then bring them to that cool looking center room. Nothing much to it, honestly, and then the statues do the rest. All the puzzles and obstacles to get to them were insultingly easy, and it's no different for the enemies. I mean, if you even look at them funny, they die. Now, let's talk about the final boss, Godan. Godan sums up the Tower of the Gods perfectly. It looks really cool and feels like it should be epic, but it's stupidly easy and falls completely flat. And apparently Link is the chosen one for beating Godan. Heck, Billy Bob from down the street could be the chosen one with Godan's fighting skills. Really unimpressive and underwhelming in my opinion. I can kind of see why people might adore this dungeon. It does have some cool aesthetics and kind of an open atmosphere to it, but that's about all I can see about it that's appealing. Even though it was duller looking, I even found the Earth Temple to be more interesting and challenging than the Tower of the Gods. So in summary, the good was the looks and the music and the mini-boss fight. The bad was the execution of the whole dungeon. Just something called the Tower of the Gods should have been way more grandiose, challenging, and exciting. But it just wasn't. It was bland, and everything was way too easy, including the boss. It just did not live up to any of my expectations after having heard it hyped up so much. Alrighty, I'll just squeeze this little one in here real quick. This is Ruta from Breath of the Wild, one of the 4 divine beasts. Now, we all know that these aren't traditional Zelda type dungeons, but they are considered dungeons nonetheless, so I figured why not just add it to the list here. Now, I found Ruta to be a fun dungeon that's small, but packs a punch like all of the divine beasts. I like having the open air feel and the light shining in from outside at all times, and even being able to go outside onto the elephant's back and trunk. Getting to the various terminals was not as easy as it looked, but it still wasn't too difficult either. The large spinning wheel in the main room was a bit puzzling for me at first, until I realized that you could actually climb to the top of it and use stasis to stop the hatch from closing, thus allowing you to check off that terminal. And there were multiple hidden chests that were fun to find and to figure out how to get to. The music in this dungeon is utterly phenomenal, as usual I have found with these water dungeons. The mini guardians were a little easy to fight, and the assortment of puzzles was pretty simple, and I'd even argue too simple. However, I found Breath of the Wild's divine beasts to be little breaths of fresh air, as they're far from traditional, and they kept the game interesting enough having the dungeon be inside of a giant machine that resembles an animal. I mean, that's pretty out there. And I can't fault much on Ruta, honestly. Even the boss, Waterblight Ganon, was pretty dang cool, not gonna lie. Although the first time I tried fighting him, I got my butt kicked. I had to keep running back and forth to a shop to buy their entire stock of bomb arrows. Eventually I found a pretty easy method though and beat it, feeling victory at last. So yeah, the good was the phenomenal score, the interesting mechanics of the elephant, and a good boss fight. The bad would be the puzzles that were a bit too easy and simple, and also the enemies that were a little too easy as well. Our next on the list, we have the Ancient Cistern from Skyward Sword. This is garbage. It's the worst dungeon I've ever played, ever. It's horrible, it's ugly, the music is crap, I hate everything about it. No, I'm just kidding, I've never even played it. It's still on my list though, as I am playing through Skyward Sword right now. I've also never played A Link Between Worlds, so that's why nothing from that game showed up on this list. And really anything like Link's Awakening or the Oracle games, Zelda 2 and the original Zelda, I just didn't really think there was anything there of so much substance to where I had to put it on this list. Everything here is basically the main water dungeons in the whole series as far as I'm concerned. And these have just been my opinions, so if you disagree, please drop a comment, let me know. I mean, I love to discuss Zelda with everybody, and I completely understand if you liked the Tower of the Gods. Trust me, I do. But I just don't think it's really for me. It's just not really tailored to my interests, unfortunately. It doesn't have everything I would want in a solid dungeon. Yeah, so there we have it. Thanks for watching, and subscribe for more, my Hylians.